Hello everybody, this is Mike from My Travel BF, and in our last video, we talked about all the things we love about living abroad in Spain. But we did mention there are quite a few things that do annoy us here, and life isn't perfect living abroad like social media sometimes likes to show. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the annoying things that we've found about living abroad in Spain. So I'm going to talk about a few different things that have annoyed me about living in Spain over the past 6 months. Make sure to stay tuned until the end because the last thing is the biggest and perhaps the most shocking thing that has annoyed me about living in Spain so far. So starting off with number one. The number one thing that annoys us about living in Spain is the late dinner time, specifically during the weekdays. Now, if you know anything about Spanish meal times, is that they're much later than in the US. For example, lunch is generally eaten around 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and dinner generally around 9 to 10 o'clock. And that can be even pushed later on the weekends, which we don't mind. We like going out for a late dinner on the weekends, and we don't generally mind a later lunch. However, what we don't like is having a late dinner during the week. Going to bed with sort of a full stomach just isn't really comfortable for us, and maybe that's just because of what we're used to in the US, eating more around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and that was even late for some people in the US. However, in Spain they generally eat a smaller dinner, but even a smaller dinner around 9, 9:30 to 10 at night, and then going to bed around 11, 11:30 is just too much, and we don't like going to bed with just a super full stomach. I just don't feel like I sleep very well, and it's generally just like not comfortable. So we prefer to eat a little bit earlier, especially during weekdays when we're waking up a little bit earlier and going to bed earlier. That's been a big adjustment and is why it's one of the things that really annoys us about living abroad in Spain. The number two thing that annoys us about living abroad in Spain is really more specific to our situation because we have Churro, that's our dog if you don't know. And the thing that annoys us is really the lack of grass in the city. So she grew up in the US, we brought her from the US to Spain, and she's really used to going to the bathroom on grass. Dogs in Spain will generally just go to the bathroom on the streets, poop and pee, and she won't do that. She refuses to do that, so we have to walk her quite a bit, which is good exercise for her, but sometimes when you just want to take her right outside to go to the bathroom, it can be a little difficult, or if it's raining, like today, we have to actually go and take her on a longer walk to find some grass. She has gotten a little used to it, going to a plaza that's nearby us that just has some gravel and dirt, and she'll go there, but especially when we first got here, it was difficult to even just find a patch of grass that, number one, dogs were allowed on, and number two, that was nearby. So that's been a big adjustment for us and has been something that's a little bit more annoying than how it was in the US. Now, number three is directly connected to number two, whether you have a dog or not. The thing you're going to notice is that there is a lot of dog poop all over the streets in Spain. It's not crazy, but it's frequent enough that you're going to notice it. They even have a saying that it's lucky to step in dog poop, which is probably because there's just so much of it around. Quite frankly, it's really annoying. Just pick it up. It's not difficult. They even have garbage bins with poop bags in them, so it's not like it's not accessible to pick it up. And it's something that's really annoying, especially if you do step in it, and even if you do get that good luck that they talk about, it's still not fun because you have to clean your shoe, and if you can't clean it immediately, it's on your shoe for the rest of the day. So the dog poop on the streets in Spain is something that's really annoying. All right. The number four thing about living abroad in Spain that's a little bit annoying is something, especially for Americans, is having to get what they call a justificante for a sick day at work. Now, a justificante is basically a doctor's note, but what's really annoying about it is if you're just sick for one day and you're not feeling well, oftentimes your job will require you to get a justificante from the doctor. Now, from an American's perspective again, if I went to the doctor in the US with good healthcare, chances are you're still going to have to pay about a $15 to $25 copay, again, with good healthcare. So you're still paying to go to the doctor. And if you're only sick one day with a headache, maybe a slight fever, or a cough, something like that, obviously this is all like non-COVID related, but if you're having like mild symptoms, chances are the doctor is going to tell you to go home, rest, maybe take a Tylenol, Advil, paracetamol, something like that, and just drink fluids and relax. That's it. So to have to go to the doctor when you're sick for potentially just one day and get that doctor's note seems a little bit ridiculous in my perspective. I actually had a great conversation with the coordinator at my school who I would report to about that, and she didn't realize, like, from a US perspective, we'd have to pay just to go to the doctor. So she basically said she's not going to require it if it's just one day. If it's beyond that, she would require it, which I thought was pretty cool and a little bit of a cultural understanding and difference that we were able to solve before it ever did come up. And I like that she really did respect sort of where I was coming from in terms of not going to the doctor. But having to get that in a lot of jobs in Spain just for being sick one day honestly seems a bit annoying, because when you're sick, you don't want to have to get up and go to the doctor, especially if it might just be a 1 or 2 day thing. In the US, I wouldn't even go to the doctor unless I had been sick for about 2 to 3 days, because then I knew it was more serious. Usually it's just something that passes or a quick virus and it's done. So having to go through that whole process here, especially for me in another language, seems a bit annoying. The fifth annoying thing about living in Spain is really the bureaucracy. Now, I get it. Living in the US and being a US citizen, you don't have to deal with residency cards, paperwork just for living there, all that sort of stuff. Anytime you move to a new country, you're going to have to do more paperwork because you need to be there legally to live and to work. So moving to Spain, we had a ton of paperwork to do, and I can easily complain about all the bureaucracy here, but I can imagine it's just as annoying, if not more annoying, for people moving to the US to live and work. So I can't sit here and say Spain is any worse, but it's something, as somebody who moved to another country, that I want to make sure to tell anyone else thinking about moving to Spain that you are going to have to do all this extra paperwork, get specific documents ready for your appointments, to get your residency card and everything like that. It's a lot of work, it's very tedious and detail oriented, so keep that in mind before making the jump to move to Spain. All right, the sixth annoying thing about living in Spain to me is the sidewalk etiquette. Now in Spain, cities are denser, people live in cities, they're out walking more than in the US where it's much more of a car culture. That is something we love that we talked about in the video of things we love in Spain. Check that out right over here. But it's also something that I don't like, because I find quite often that people will walk like arm in arm and maybe 3 people will be walking towards you and they can see you coming. There's not space on the sidewalk for 4 people to walk across and they simply don't move. That's very frustrating for me. To me, it's just polite to have one person on the end kind of hop in front of their group or go behind their group for the 1 second it takes to pass and let the other person pass. It's something in Spain I've noticed happens quite often. And it can be really frustrating, especially living in a big city like Madrid, where you're just around people all the time. Again, this could be because I'm just living in a bigger city now here in Spain compared to in the US, where more people are out walking. Could possibly happen in a bigger city like Chicago or New York City just as often, but I haven't experienced it, which is why I'm putting it in here of my experiences of annoying things living in Spain. The next annoying thing about living abroad in Spain is people have their cuadrillas. A cuadrilla is basically a group of friends from when you're in, say, elementary school or growing up together. And that's a little bit annoying because it's hard to break into to make friends. It's one of the things we talked about in our pros and cons video of living abroad. You can check that out right up here. In that video, we talked about how it can be difficult to make friends abroad, but it's also a really cool thing. And in Spain, a lot of people don't move away for college and end up kind of staying in their same friend group that they went to elementary, high school with, college with, and then now are friends with. Which there are some really cool things about that I really like and I'm kind of jealous of, coming from the US where people move around a lot more and you might lose a lot of friends over time. It's really cool that they've stuck together and they still are good friends and they've been friends for so many years. However, as somebody who's moved here as a foreigner in this country, it can be hard to break into those groups and really meet people or be invited to those. And understandably so, there are a lot of inside jokes that probably happen and go along with that. But it is one of those things that it just makes it a little bit more difficult to meet more local people here because the groups are so ingrained and have stuck together for so long that it's difficult to let anyone new in. So the very last and perhaps the biggest, most shocking and most annoying things about living in Spain is the so-called work-life balance that they have here. So this is coming from my perspective as an American, where typically we think in Europe or in Spain in general, they have a great work-life balance. I really haven't found that to be the case, and I'll explain why. First of all, the typical working day might be from 9 o'clock until 2 o'clock, where there's a 2-hour break from 2 to 4 for lunch, something like that. And then maybe you go back to work around 4 or 5 o'clock for another 3 or 4 hours. To me, that's a super long day. And then when you get off work at 9 o'clock, you come home and eat dinner and then watch TV and go to bed. You don't really have any free time for a lot of stuff. Now, I know that's not every job. That's some jobs of some people we've met here, but that's not really a work-life balance to me. Now, I'm coming from the US, where it's typically 8 hours of work, 8 hours of free time in the afternoon, and then 8 hours of sleep. Now, understandably, that's not every company in the US, and that's not everyone's job in the US. There are people who are expected to work 60, 70-hour weeks, and that's just the expectation in a very toxic work culture. And it's the more you work, the better you are, and the more you'll succeed, not actually the productivity behind it. So I understand that that exists in the US too. And the US certainly is not perfect with a work-life balance at all. However, in Spain, I feel like this idea that foreigners have who move here, and they come in with this, I'll have this beautiful work-life balance in Spain, just necessarily isn't true. In sort of contradicting myself there, and I want to point this out because I feel as though it's very important, is that in Spain, your job doesn't necessarily make up a huge part of your identity. Your job in the US is a huge part of your identity, and it's often how a lot of us start conversations. I think it's kind of great in Spain that even though they maybe work longer hours or different hours than the US, the second they leave work, I don't see a lot of people sort of tied to work or expected to check their emails or be on call or things like that. Obviously, that's not every job, and I'm sure there are jobs like that, but overall, I don't see that like constantly having to be connected and working all the time culture here. So in that aspect, they do have a better work-life balance than a lot of places in the US. For me, it's more the hours and how they're spread out throughout the day that I don't traditionally see this typical work-life balance that you hear about in Spain or in Europe. Again, that's coming from my perspective and perhaps my mindset when I came here. I guess that's just how it is. My job is understandably a little bit different here as a language assistant than most other people's, but that's something that's been a little bit annoying and a little bit hard to get used to here in Spain. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below if there's something that you just don't agree with, or maybe you live in Spain or have lived in Spain and you feel like there's something we've missed that annoyed you during your time here. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear different opinions because, again, we're not necessarily experts at all of this. This is based on our time living in Spain so far. So these things are obviously bound to change the more we've lived here. Also, if you do like the video, make sure to give us a thumbs up. That really helps us out. And make sure to subscribe to get updates on what it's like living abroad as an American and all our videos about exploring local experiences here in Spain. And while you're here, make sure to take a look at our other videos, and we'll see you over there. Bye!